all this social distancing and seating arrangements is a bit new to us. It's the first event we've had since the pandemic, and there's 200 people roughly in the room, and I hope you all feel there's plenty of distance and you all feel safe. On behalf of DocsIreland, I'd like to welcome you all to this very special screening tonight of Father Des, The Way He Saw It. We're really honoured to be presenting the film. There's two things that are very, very important to us. One is community and the inclusion of community in the work that we do. And the other thing is the supporting of local Indigenous filmmaking talent. And I think this screening tonight brings both of those things together really nicely. So I'm going to introduce Ciaran Cahill. He'll say a few words, and then the director of tonight's film, Vincent Kinnaird, will speak. So thank you very much.
I have a few notes prepared. One of Des's pet hates is when somebody said, "Would you say a few words?" You know, it was always the thing I dreaded. So first of all, I want to welcome you all here to the event. It's great to be able to be together. I want to welcome Vincent's family, his parents, Seamus and Anne, his wife Sarah, and his children, Rory, Noel, Joy, and his brothers Raymond, Chris, and Paul. I want to welcome Des's family, his friends, and his neighbours to the world premiere of Father Des, The Way He Saw It by Vincent Kinnaird. I'd like to especially welcome members of the Ballymurphy Massacre families who are here tonight, as the campaign was very close to Des's heart. And as you will all know, in May of this year, all of their loved ones were declared entirely innocent. So tonight is also the second anniversary event, and last year we had a planned panel discussion, but obviously COVID got in the way and all things went on Zoom, digital. So it's great that we're together here and sitting here, not too far actually from where it all started for the Wilson family in 13 Chichester Street above the Chester Bar. I'm the coordinator of Spring Hill Community House, the project that Des set up in 1972. Since then, we've been delivering education, training, health awareness therapies and supporting victims of the conflict. The house expanded into Conway Education Centre, and today both projects are still on the go. So Des's passing has left a huge void for us all, for anybody that knew him, and that would be impossible to fill. But he's left a wonderful legacy in the work that he done, in the projects that he started and the people that he met. Part of his legacy is an incredible archive of documents, correspondence, diaries, publications, film, sound recordings and broadcasts, and photographs dating back to the 1960s. We're in the process of cataloguing and documenting, and we hope to have that accessible to the public in an interpretive centre in Des's memory. In fact, one of the recordings from that archive starts the film off, and it's a sound recording that he made on the spot. Vincent is going to introduce the film in a minute, but I just want to take a wee bit of time to introduce Vincent to everybody here. So, he's a local filmmaker, producer from West Belfast, Hawthorne Street to be exact. His father Seamus was originally from Ballymurphy, and I'm sure crossed paths with Des somewhere in Glenalina. He's been making films since his late teens. His early work included dramas with BBC, Channel 4 and renowned filmmaker Ken Loach. After that, he started making films, short films of his own, and had success with films entered into the Cannes and the Los Angeles film festivals. Since then, he's focused on documentaries with subjects that he knows and was passionate about, including A Summer in Rathlin and The Burning of Bombay Street. He first met Des with Harold Good in 2010, and shortly after began his labour of love, culminating in what I think is his best work yet, Father Des, The Way He Saw It. Vincent Kinnaird. Thank you.
Thanks to Spring Hill Community House, to Féile an Phobal, to DocsIreland for presenting this screening. It may look a bit strange that it's presented as a work in progress. There's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is that we need to raise money to pay broadcasters for all the archive that's in it, so that we can release it to Netflix or whichever broadcaster will show it eventually. That, plus working over the years with a limited budget, means that we've sort of begged, borrowed, stolen, and had a lot of support from a lot of people. I'll try and not speak for too long now, because at the end of the film, myself and Eilish Rooney, who is a close friend of Des, will be having a conversation. So yeah, just a thanks really to everyone who has stuck with us on this over the last decade, nearly. Producers, technicians, everybody's greatly valued, and it couldn't have been done without you. To Stephen Ray for doing the voiceover. Stephen's in Spain filming at the minute. To Chris Scott from Fine Point Films, who stuck with me in the last week to finish this and get the final film that you will see tonight. To my producers, Kate Southwell, Sarah Redden, Johnny Farley, to Michelle Devlin and Trevor Burney, who are exec producers, and to Ciaran Cahill and Eilish Rooney, who are associate producers. To PIO Media, to DocsIreland, to Fine Point Films, and to Northern Ireland Screen also, who helped out in the earlier development, and with whom we hope to engage again when we release this out to the broadcast world and the world at large. Thankfully, we have the chance to recognise Des and bring Des' story out to those to whom it may have been a bit of a hidden history. So I think that Des did the real work of Christ on earth. And someone who acknowledged that very, very soon after Des passed away was the president of our country, Michael D. Higgins. He released a statement, and I'll read a couple of excerpts from it, and then we will roll the film. So on Wednesday the 6th of November 2019, President Higgins said, "It is with great sadness that I have learned of the death of Father Des Wilson. As President of Ireland, may I convey my deepest condolences to his family and friends, and express my thanks to Father Des Wilson's life of dedicated service, inspired by what was a generous vision of a new, more inclusive, peaceful and welcoming Ireland. In his work for the betterment of communities, Father Wilson was unafraid to challenge figures of authority from all sides. It was his sense of fairness and decency that resulted in him being called upon, together with Father Jerry Reynolds and Father Alex Reid, to help in bringing about the negotiations that led to the IRA ceasefire. Ciaran Cahill de An Lach, may his soul rest in peace." Thank you. Hope you enjoy the film.
About the release of the film, based back together.
Just sorting ourselves out here.
Thanks very much for the appreciation there at the end, folks. Thank you. And we got Lelia in here. So, Eilish is going to start a conversation with me about making a film, then we're going to reminisce a little bit about Des, and then talk generally beyond that. But first of all, can I just say that Eilish Rooney is an emeritus scholar of the Transitional Justice Institute in Ulster University. Is that correct? Is that the correct title?
What that means is, you still do work for the place, but they don't pay you.
And just even to put a context on your work in that department, you know, give us just a wee bit about what you did there in the last while before we move on. Just introduce yourself to the audience.
He's turning the tables here. This wasn't planned. This wasn't planned. Ciaran, what were you wanting to say there?
Maybe because I was supposed to introduce you, Eilish.
That's right.
But just the emotion of the film.
It's too much.
Okay.
My name is Eilish Rooney, and introduced myself last night at a poetry reading we had for the Ballymurphy families. And just out of nowhere came the truth of the matter that in Ballymurphy I was always known as Deirdre McManus's sister. And it amused me to think of how we introduce ourselves and who we think we are, you know. And somebody came up afterwards and asked me to sign a poetry book and said, please sign it Georgie McManus's sister. And I've loved that. Vincent, I'm not really going to say much about myself.
I just wanted people to know generally who you were. Yes,
thank you very much.
No worries.
I've been told to sit in the chair by Lelia, who's a wonderful director, let me tell you. So my job is really, Vincent, to answer some of the questions that might have occurred to people as they were watching the film. A truly wonderful film.
Thank you.
Of a, what can you say, an amazing man.
Absolutely.
I suppose I'll start and settle us all down a wee bit with some of the practicalities that Vincent faced. And then we'll get round to talking about Des whenever things are settled down and our emotions are a little calmer. It was a 10-year project, isn't that right?
Yes, I mean, yes, because we started interviewing Des round about sometime in 2011. We'd made a documentary about the burning of Bombay Street, and we'd interviewed Des and Reverend Harold Good in Bombay Street, and myself and the producer of that, Kate, who unfortunately isn't here tonight because she's self-isolating, but she's watching the film on her own internet link. But anyway, we then talked about it, and she actually suggested, because we got to know Des over the previous 6 months or so, we talked one day and said, would we consider doing that? And we then went about doing it. And we didn't really wait for, because of the nature of it, at that stage, Des would have been about 84, as you saw in the interviews, in great shape, you know. So we just went about doing it. And he joked at the time, I will be finished this by Christmas. Little did he know it would be 10 Christmases or 9 Christmases later by the time we did. But anyway, so we would interview him for a couple of hours at a time, maybe 6 times over the next sort of up until maybe the end of 2012. And at that point we visited Falcara, Donegal, which you saw the later interviews where he talks about the church and reflects on his view of the way things are and the way they will develop. So that was that part of it. And then obviously life goes on, and we did pitch it at the BBC, we did pitch it at RTE, we did pitch it at Channel 4, and you may as well be whistling in the wind, I suppose, for a story of someone like Des who speaks his mind and says what's right. And so life got in the way, and other work came along, and we kept in contact, and I'd always be on the phone from time to time with Ciaran here, or with Des, or with Noel. And every so often there'd be a little event. You know, there were some events in the mill that didn't end up in the film. So over that, maybe the next sort of 13, 14, 15. In 2015, Northern Ireland Screen gave us some support, and we made a little trailer. And we tried to pitch it again at the broadcasters, and we failed again. And then in 2017, 18, it started ramping up again. Now we had filmed other things like the homeopathy event and some other little events in the meantime.
Before you go on, Vincent, you've used the word pitch a couple of times there, and everybody in the room wouldn't know what that means. So, and a lot of people would want to know what difference would it have made to you and to the film if your pitch had been taken up.
So to pitch an idea at a broadcaster basically means to go into the room and say, here's my idea. You commissioned me last year to do something about Rathlin, or about cinema in Belfast, or about how animals are treated within environments. Here's one here about a great leader, a great person, but no, they didn't support that. And so we tried that. We've tried that a few times, and we will continue that, because there's a time for everything. So the idea was rejected. At which point you may have got a budget, and you may have been able to make the thing quicker, but in a different way. But so then after we were rejected to make it for broadcasters, we said, well, we'll make it anyway. It's just going to take a while. And then around about 2017, 2018, Learning Screen supported us again to make a little trailer, and Stephen Ray got involved at that point. And from then, really, the momentum started. And we kept filming. We filmed the reading in the West Club with Stephen Ray and Jimmy Doran and Tony Devlin and David Michaeliski and many other actors. And from there, then, we put a concerted effort in to make it happen. And we knew then Des's state of health was changing and, deteriorating. So on we went, and eventually we got there about a year ago. Yourself and Ciaran came down and watched the rough cut. Michelle Devlin then, Trevor Burney came along after that and decided they would, come behind it as exec producers. We asked them to do that, and they were very grateful that they did. So we got some support with facilities, and here we are.
Great. Before we go on, I'd love to know, how did you feel this evening watching your film with an audience?
It was surreal, I'll be quite honest, I tried to convince myself that I wasn't sort of anxious or nervous about it, but I woke up this morning and the tail end of my dream was that Malachi Cush had somehow wanted to change things in the film. I had to explain to him that he couldn't because the film was already in the cinema, So I don't know where that came from, but that's just an insight into my world. But yeah, it felt surreal, I'll be quite honest, because you work on it and then there it is there, and your family and your friends are around you, and an appreciative home audience as well. But it feels good, I'll be quite honest, it feels good, and honours paid to Des, and that's important to me as well.
Did you sense, as I did, the intensity of the audience?
I think I did. It's kind of hard yourself.
About that, yeah.
I think I did. I certainly felt it. I screened it with you and Ciaran. I screened it with Michelle and Trevor, the exec producers. Screened it then for an audience up in Corpus Christi, up in Ballymurphy, and really felt it there. I did feel it in the room tonight. Yes, no, I did. Did you?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. I find it very moving, and I can imagine how Ciaran felt about it as it was going on, and as most of the people in this room would know Des, obviously. And to see him and to see his journey and almost to go with him again on the journey was a privilege and a wonderful insight you've provided for us in your film.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Tell us about some of the journey that you've had in making the film, maybe some of the highlights and some of the downtimes.
Well, this is a highlight. Let's be honest, this is a highlight. Screening it to everyone up at Springhill Community House was a highlight. Getting to a point where it actually feels like a film rather than just interviews and archive and everything that's just sitting there is a positive, So there have been a lot of positives in the last year or two, let's say, when it actually started coming together and the momentum grew and we got support and we got here. Because it's such a long project compared to a 30-minute TV documentary that you would have a budget to do in a limited number of months, I guess there were frustrations along the way of, will we ever get there with this? And to be quite honest, the whole work in progress thing, we still have to raise money to pay for the archive so that we can release it. So that's the next step, and that's why it's called a work in progress at the minute. So, but our producers and exec producers, we'll keep going with that, and we'll get it out there. And it's more logistical and a bit of a slog to do that, but we've got good support, and we'll re-engage with broadcasters and screen agencies to do that. Yeah. So that's frustrating. That's something that continues to, to be something that needs to be sorted. But we'll get there. And if anybody has a spare 20 or 30 grand, something that they want to throw at it, they can.
We'll ask Leah about that because she knows a thing or two about fundraising. And Ciaran, go ahead.
No, just if you could think closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. My apologies. Thank you very much, Ciaran. I hate that when it happens to me. You met Des those years ago and started on this project. after the Bombay Street interview with Reverend Harold Good as well, who we saw there at the funeral, indeed. Tell us something about what you learned about Des over that period of time of being quite close to him and then, being away and coming back.
I think the word that comes to mind with two words: great humanity. A lot of learning. How to navigate difficult situations. I think a lot of the learning for me came from the editing, because there you were in a room listening to a great philosopher, a great thinker, someone with great humanity, courage, who didn't let authorities who were not acting in, let's say, good faith sometimes walk all over him or other people that he was advocating for. And it also, so for that, I think after the interviews you nearly digest them more, especially if you're listening to them over and over, and there was maybe 6, 7, 8 hours of interview to be edited down as well. So a massive amount of learning about life, a lot of insight, and very, very privileged, and some things that I could perhaps apply, to life, and like the way you would have learned from Des and Noel as well, so yeah, it was, and a bit of a history lesson, everything that was surrounding it. So you think about how you present this to a younger audience, or an audience that's not from this country, that maybe isn't as au fait with the politics of Ireland. So all that stuff surrounding the story as well, surrounding Des's chronological history, if you like, as well, was part of it.
I have to say, what's wonderful about the film, I think, and I'm sure most people here will agree, what's wonderful is that we're being given, if you like, a history of Des's life and times, but it's our history of a life and times that many of us have lived through. And if we didn't live through it, we're having to face the consequences of the things that Des did live through. And you've done that in the film superbly, I think, Vincent. Superbly, the back footage and the back and forward movement of it, and Des's steadfastness through it. You've captured that so well. I'm very grateful to you. And I want to know, did you enjoy it at all? Were there parts of it that you enjoyed?
Very much. I very much enjoyed it. And to me, the last 20 minutes or half hour are very much stuff that happened currently. I really enjoyed being there. I particularly enjoyed filming in Donegal. And I enjoyed just conversations with Des along the way, because I'd be up and down to the house, not necessarily filming, and just getting to know him. My eldest son, Rory, met him. I used to call in on maybe the last, 8, 9 years. Used to call in on Christmas Eve with a bottle of red wine and a box of celebrations, and sometimes you'd go in and maybe just Noel would be there, or Des would be there, or sometimes Ciaran would be there, or Pete would be in from next door, and just wee things like that. Just in the last 10 years, they've got to know somebody like Des, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
Is there anything else you'd like to ask me?
I'd like to ask you about, I suppose, some of your reminiscences of Des, beyond what we've talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe the first time you met him, or a poignant moment, or here or there.
Yeah. The reason I asked Vincent that is because he said that at a point in the interview he wanted to kind of turn the tables and have a conversation with me. One of the things that I remembered so clearly there watching tonight was Sunday night mass in the house. For anybody who was there, and some people here were there, it was the lame and the halt, I would have called us, people who turned up at Spring Hill Community House on a Sunday evening, knowing that Des was was going to say Mass. Well, to say that Des was going to say Mass, he would have said that we were saying Mass. And that's actually what happened. We all said Mass. You know, Bob did the Gospel, somebody else did the reading, and somebody else. And at a moment in the Mass, we all went quiet. And the reason for the quietness was that Des had learned from the Quakers. He and Noel had gone to a Quaker service one time, and they have a silence during which anyone can say anything. And let me tell you, people did say anything in those silences sometimes. It was a wonderful experience, and it actually almost, I think, couldn't be captured by film. It might be captured maybe sometime in future, maybe there'll be a poem about it or something sometime, Vincent, or I don't know what, you know, but and we were a handful of people at Des's Mass, but we got all the courtesy and love that he gave to, it could have been a congregation of thousands. So that's a memory that you brought back to me tonight, Vincent. And I loved the people you talked to. I loved listening to, you know, all of the people who contributed that you interviewed. Also seeing the young people who'd been to the Spring Hill, the young school refusers it made me think of. And, you know, Ciaran, the people whose lives have been changed by Des and by Spring Hill and continue to be as well, you know.
Do you think you would have gone the same path and ended up in, say, for sake of argument, University of Ulster, if it weren't for Spring Hill Community House or your interlude or your, you know, friendships with Des and Noel?
The friendship with Des and the work in Spring Hill changed my life. There's no two ways about it. Changed my life. I mean, I went on to university, and then towards the end of studying, was asked would I like to do some classes in Spring Hill, and you know, I had done a degree and done loads of things, but came there and really learned. I mean, I remember it was a living room, and we sat by the fireside, and people were studying A-level literature, you know, Chaucer and Shakespeare and whatever else the great texts were. But the amazing thing was that education was free. It was in the hands of the students. They were the boss, if you like, or they were in charge of what went on. Noel brought in a cup of tea and some biscuits, and then on we went with the next wee bit of Chaucer that we were going to study. And at one point in the year, we would have went to Donegal, and I was smiling to myself at Des talking about women talking, because from the moment we landed, we were talking. Now, me being the teacher, I would hustle everybody in to do some studying as well. But we used to sit up round the fire late at night, all of it done as, you know, a resource that Des made available to people. And that's what he did. He was part of a church that held on to its resources, it seems to me, and he said it certainly. But he became a church, we became a church with him, where resources were shared and great fun was shared as well.
Just looking at, you wrote a lovely article about Des there in the last couple of weeks, and a couple of notes I took from it, and something you said in one of the first pieces of interview in the film was, what if the church, well, no, you pointed out that the church hadn't heeded Des when he said, look, help these people, 1969, look what's going on, stand up for them, and the church didn't. In later years, you would talk to Des about that, and you talked about what if the church had listened and had done something. Would things have been different? Would we have had the conflict in the same way? What's your any insights on that?
Vincent, I was thinking of you last night in your film, whenever the Ballymurphy Families event was on, and the night before even more, when Father Paddy McCafferty did a homily for the Ballymurphy Families' 50th anniversary. And I was thinking of your film and saying to myself, if Vincent was here, he'd be filming this, and this would feature in Des's film. Because the things that Father McCafferty said at the Mass that evening, if we'd heard them 50 years before from the church, I thought history would have been changed. I think the British state, if the church had stood up, a powerful, wealthy, global institution had stood up and stood with the people here, as Father Paddy McCafferty did the other night. Well, for one thing, and this is something to say, Bloody Sunday would not have happened. I have no doubt about that. Father McCafferty's words were so strong about what had happened to the people of Ballymurphy that if those words had been said at the time, there is no way I think that the British state would have went into Derry the way it did, with the consequences it had.
Shocking, really, when you think of it.
And Des, in his gentle way, as Lelia was saying, a power behind it. He saw that and witnessed it and lived with it.
But with someone like Bishop Philbin, the high conservatism that he displayed, that wasn't happening. By the time Des was buried, you had the Bishop of Down and Connor speaking at his graveside. Now, he wasn't officiating at the Mass, but he was speaking at his graveside. What's your view on how things moved from the 60s through to these times, and the view of Des's opinion and perspective being vindicated?
You see, he wouldn't have talked about his perspective being vindicated at all.
But as we say it, as I ask.
We say it that way, yeah. I mean, the hierarchy of the church, became friends with Des, and kind friends and good friends with Des, and he enjoyed the friendship. It didn't change his views in any way, but something that he was saying earlier at Bombay Street and in several places throughout the film about difference and dispute not being a bar to friendship. When you really think that through, that's a tough place to be. It's a tough place to have arrived at. But with such love and humility, Des was there and could do that, and he would have continued to do that. And he had great time for the fellow priests that came to see him and that remained friends with him. I think he would see the church as an institution that's into survival mode at the moment, it seems to me. And I think he would be as severe in his observations as he ever was, but always with the idea that friendship continues with people. And indeed, one of his last initiatives that we've talked briefly about, Vincent, was when he gathered a few people together shortly before he went into hospital, into the nursing home, and asked us to contact and be in touch with our unionist neighbours and friends to start talking about unity on the island of Ireland. Des was forever the talk about pushing the boat out, or pushing the envelope, or he was forever looking to the future and looking to a future that he believed would improve life for all of us. And his view of unionist friends and neighbours was that there was a conversation there to be had, and had with great respect and always in friendship.
And that conversation continues?
It's flourishing, Vincent. It's begging a film to be made of it.
I think that's a very good point to finish the conversation on. Ellie Shrooney. Thank you very much, folks.
Filmmaker, Vincent.